Without any further ado, let's get down to business. Tonight we're doing the summer lecture series 2019, which is about the pogroms of 1881, which were a harbinger of the catastrophe, or what do you call it? Blessing in disguise. Thank you. You've got it better than me. And tonight is the fifth lecture called New Math Pogroms plus Haskalah equals Zionism. Try to squeeze that tonight. There's a lot of material always to cover. We'll do whatever we can in the time allotted. Believe it or not, after all the junk that we went through in the last couple of talks, the pogroms of 1881, there was another one in 1882. Okay? But one. It was in Balto, which is in Ukraine. Jake, I don't have the pointer. Well, right there. The reason I'm pointing to it, you'll see in a second. So it was in the same general area of the Pale, in the south, southeast, as they say, and same scenario. The police don't interfere. All the 1,400 of 1,500 Jewish houses were destroyed. Is a town, Balto is a town, it's really Romania. Again, it's really Romania. But at that time, Russia owned Bessarabia. It was part annexed to the Ukraine because of the war that just concluded. But it doesn't matter. The majority of the town was Jewish. You know? So how do you have a minority? Well, the answer is it's not the locals. They come in on a train. How do you come in on the train armed with clubs and all the rest of it? Where's the conductor? Do you see my point? Where the police? So this is what it was. So everybody in Russia, said, oh, here we go again. And who knows what's coming beyond that? But by this point, as I mentioned last night, this Yitzhak Elchanan business with the correspondence, secret news, they got it out there. So as soon as this happened, they got the word out. And all the Europeans are starting to say, the Russian government immediately said the same anal reaction as before. It's the Jews' fault. It's their fault. They obviously are exploiting the people in town. Mind you, the majority of the people in town are Jewish, but they're exploiting the people, obviously, in the neighborhood. But by this time, thanks to these news reports, they get out whether the Russians want it or not. All the European countries are saying like this: is Russia a land of barbarism? Is there acts of mamish, no law and order over there? Literally, a breakout once or twice can happen. Every year, are we starting another new cycle? Is this the policy of a government? Europe was more civilized at that time. And the result is that Tsar fired Ignatieff, who was the moms that we were talking about last time. They got rid of him. Because he was the one who basically said, what's the problem? I don't blame the people for rioting. And anyway, you can leave the country, go to the West. So he was fired. And he was replaced by a famous guy, Count Dmitry Tolstoy. Now, this is going to be very reflective of Russia. This is not Tolstoy, the author. It's a relative. Tolstoy was an extreme hard right-wing reactionary, like all these guys, and a big anti-Semite, like all these guys. But the Jews loved the fact that he came into power, because at least he had the virtues of an extreme right-winger, which was extreme law and order, no pogroms. You get it? A real, genuine conservative has the pluses and minuses. But one of the pluses is no law, no breaking of law, no law and order. Everybody has to follow. It's a police state, means a police state. There's a minus in a police state, and there's a plus in a police state. The minus is you have no rights. The plus is you can walk up the street. Don't take that for granted. Not if you live in Russia. So we're actually glad to get this guy, right, who remained the interior minister for the rest of the reign of Alexander III. And that means that's the end of the pogroms. So everything we talked about, I called it the 1881 pogroms because primarily that's when it all occurred. There was one, as I just told you, in 1882, and then there weren't. Not until 20 years later. So for the rest of 1880s, 1890s, it's a common fallacy that Russia is a land of pogroms, all the rest of it. No, it isn't. Usually it's a law and order. And under the Tsar, usually it was a law and order. But once in a while, the regime, for its own purposes, went ahead and did various things. The regime went ahead and...
Which one do you want, screen or you?
Follow what he said. Yeah. So anyway, from then on, the regime just practiced white pogrom, not red pogrom, which means not violence, but administrative actions. So there's always a new law under Alexander III. Jews can't do this. They got to get out of this business. They get kicked out of this city. Anatevka. You understand? That takes place under Alexander III. Right? It's Alexander III. It's a Shalom Aleichem story. It's a Broadway production. But what does that mean? It's one of those many villages all the time where the Jews have to leave. Okay? It says what you call white pogrom. There's nothing violent, but it's legal. You get it? Jews are kicked out of the school. They can't be a doctor, can't be a lawyer, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the facts of the case. Now we have to analyze a little bit. By the time of the pogroms in the early 1880s, you have to understand that the Jewish population in the Russian Empire, which is the Pale Settlement, remember they weren't allowed to live in Russia. So it's the part of Poland that Russia took over, including Lithuania, Ukraine, all the rest of that, White Russia. So by the time of the pogroms in the early 1880s, looking back today intelligently, the Jewish population of the Russian Empire was in a turmoil, politically, economically, culturally, and demographically. Politically, the czars were not giving an inch. Okay? Not an inch, as we've seen. So there was no rights they would give to the Jews. And even though all the other countries of the world by this time had given the Jews civil rights, so it's the world that you and I are familiar with today, in which, at least in the legal sense, a Jew can move anywhere, go into any business, to get vote with other people, do all those sorts of normal, regular things. I'm not talking about holding office necessarily. I'm not talking being a general in the army. Just to live a normal, what you call middle-class life. No. Remember, the laws in the Russian Empire, until 1917, said the word Jew in it. A Christian could be a lawyer and a Jew not, something like that. That's how the law is written. A Christian can live over here and a Jew can't. A Christian is allowed to operate this business and a Jew is not. Which, of course, meant, as not a racism, if a Jew converts, he could do it. Plenty of Jews convert for that very reason. You understand, it wasn't Hitler, it's a different system, it's religious. So it's interesting, the laws written along these lines, and they were there in the time of Woodrow Wilson. I'm just saying, they never did quit. And so that means that politically, the Jewish community is constantly squeezed, and there's no relaxation of the pressure. If you're a young person, Jewish, growing up, what is your plan? What's the plan? Where do you want to go? Little by little, whatever job your father was in, sooner or later will be declared usher. So what is the plan? That's number one. Economically, the Jews, now here we're analyzing from the hindsight of 2 centuries. Right, we're looking from today's perspective. The Jews suffered 2 very heavy dislocations. First of all, the Industrial Revolution. So people didn't even realize it. It radically changed the economy. So Jews used to be horse and wagon riders, and now that's being replaced by the railroads. You get it? Used to be that the peasants in the countryside stayed real poor and worked in the countryside. Now the cities are working into large industrial centers, and that means the money's going to be in the factories and that sort of business. And the average Jew can't get a job in the factory. You hear what I said? An average Jew can't get a job in the factory, even if the factory is owned by a Jew, because the general climate is such that if he hires too many Jews, the government will come down on him. And I hate to say it, even the Shomer Shabbos bosses and all the rest of it wouldn't hire fellow Jews. Okay, it was a notorious problem in the late 19th, early 20th century. It's what went. And you also have these bureaucratic, anti-economic white pogroms. What's this business? Jews can't own a bar. Jews can't operate this kind of business. Jews can't do that. That doesn't make any sense economically, because capitalism is based on the idea that the smartest person can do the most efficient job in getting the goods out there or performing the services, and it doesn't matter. So the Jews are squeezed politically, and to be squeezed by very large economic trends. I would also throw in, by the way, not to be too economic about this, the world was going through a tremendous depression in 1881. Many people don't know that. We're all familiar with the 1929 depression, and that is true, no question about it. That's the greatest depression in history. The second greatest is 1873 to 1895. People don't know that. When there was a huge failure of banks in New York, Vienna, and around the world, which crashed the economies. There's a whole bunch of reasons behind it. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but led to tremendous unemployment and what should I say, stopping of the number one economic enterprise in the 19th century, which is railroad building. And so that affects the Jews also, because how do they say it? Last hired and first fired. So if you're Jewish, you simply say like this: Man nochal b'yom hashlishi. How do you get bread on the table? I mean, starvation, hunger was a reality in that world. And it's kind of hard for us to understand this, because I'm not talking about World War II, I'm not talking about the First World War and the Civil War, I'm talking about in regular times. I'm talking about the 1870s, 80s, and 90s specifically. It got a little bit better in the late 90s. And, what do you do? Okay? Now, culturally, Russian Jewry was repeatedly whacked over the head, as we've seen, by discrimination and white pogroms, subject to zigzags in government policy. Remember, one time, the earlier Tsar said we want all the Jews to join college and high school to assimilate them. But then Alexander III said we don't want the Jews in college and high school. So if you were in the middle of a college program, university program, and now it's the new Tsar, you get kicked out, you see? So how do you like that? A guy's like 3 years in medical school, third year medical school, just finished. Shalom. To give you an example of what I'm talking about. You're in second year of engineering. Shalom. You understand? Because they had numerous clauses. So the Jews can only be 5% or sometimes 3% of the student body. Well, too many Jews here, get out. Okay? Now, anyway, in Christ on many levels, so the Jews, and we're talking about a huge number of Jews, the largest Jewish community in the world, responded to the crisis in a split way, not a united way. Because the Klal Yisrael was no longer the old Klal Yisrael. Everybody's kind of religious, looks at things the same way. But quite the contrary. Under the pressure of all these trends, plus the modernity in general, the cultural modernity of the 19th century, Charles Darwin and everything like that, so science, the Jews broke into many different groups. And that means that they didn't have the old monolithic Jewish response to events, which used to be the one great power of the Jewish people. Our ancestors, long, long ago, usually kind of all were in the same general page, and they responded to events and crises in the same general way, and therefore they could raise money and lobby and do things in a commonly agreed upon fashion. But this in the 19th century, it's already 1880s. It doesn't work anymore. Now, that means, therefore, that how do you respond to this unending anti-Semitism, which doesn't look like it'll ever go away? And by the way, it never did go away. You know and I know. This continued all the way to the last day of the Tsar. This is 1881, 1917, when the Tsar fell. It never went away. Right? Last month I spoke about World War I, where the Russian army killed and raped everybody as a system during World War I throughout Eastern Europe. So, if you notice how they react. Now, it's very interesting, at least to me. The Frum simply say, try to batten down the hatches and double down. There's an old teaching in the Bible, right? Chavi, lechami, bo b'chadirecha. The prophet Isaiah says, go and hide in your room and wait till the storm passes. So if you ask the big rabbis, what do you do? What are you supposed to do in Russia? It's the Tsar, it's Stalin. What can you do? You try to do the best. You lie low and try to weather the storm. And you hope for one day things get better. If it doesn't get better, it doesn't get better. That's what the Rebbe Shalom wants, like that. No, they had no plan. They're just trying to. That's the old traditional way. By the way, it works, in a certain way. But you can understand it's not going to appeal to many people as the late 19th century. But that is the old traditional fashion. You daven, right? And now listen. Things happen, things change, and they do. Now, not in this case, but, they do. At the opposite end of the Jewish spectrum, the assimilationists say, no, we have to Russify, adopt the Russian language, the Russian culture, and the Russian sentiment. We have to stop being, you don't have to convert, but you have to do everything but. Listen, let's face it, we're not mamish Russians. As a spirit, as an neshama. You understand? You respond to Holy Russia. You could be Jewish, you're Holy Russia. You get thrilled when you hear Russian language. All that business. Okay? And what can I tell you? There was a big push, even among, Hebrew speakers for extreme assimilation. So here's a guy, Polakov, who didn't convert, became a multimillionaire, came from Shtetl, him and his two brothers. They built the railroads of Russia, such as were built in the time of the Tsar. Meaning he's the guy who put together the finances and organized the railroad commission, all that kind of business, without which Russia would be totally helpless. One of the reasons Russia lost the First World War and other wars is that they didn't have enough railroads, even with all this extra building, because Russia is gigantic. In fact, even today, they don't have the proper road system. Isn't that amazing in the year 2019? It's okay with me, but I'm just telling you, that's how it goes over there. So this guy, Polakov, when the riots hit and the pogroms are going, he goes to the Tsar, goes to the minister, tell us what we need to do, kissing the boots, all the rest of it. Because, listen, Leipzig Gittentag, he's got a palace in St. Petersburg. He's a multimillionaire. But the Russians make him rub his nose in the ground. He's a multimillionaire. By the way, he owns mansions in the French Riviera, Biarritz. And he builds a shul there even. But his parents, when they get blind in old age, they can move to his palace in St. Petersburg, but they can't bring any Jewish help. That's their way of saying, what is that? You know what I'm saying? What is that? But what's his approach? Extreme assimilation. We haven't assimilated enough. As long as the Jews are speaking Yiddish, as long as the Jews dress with those funny things in the ears, with those funny-looking Jewish beards, they wear these things over here, it's our fault. Okay? So that's the assimilationist reaction. And in the middle, between the Frum and the assimilationists, were the many who tried to do both, try to be Jewish, and Russian. And my friends, that is not an easy thing to be. Because at the end of the day, you ain't Russian. You understand? The Maskilim generally fell into this group. They advocated, I would call it biculturalism, Hebrew and Russian. And so this is the background for the greatest Maskilic poet who, as we all know, said, Yehudi b'beisecha v'adam b'tzeisecha. What did he mean? In your house, Yehudi. He meant, you have Shabbos, you have Friday night dinner and all the rest of it. But on the street, Russian. Okay? So what is that? You're trying to, Now let's be honest. We do a lot in America. Do we not? You do a lot in America. It's a tricky point it's a pressure point I just poked. How much, where it is, do you have two identities? Do you act one way here, another way there? It's an old idea. Other Maskilim advocated what they call Hebrew secular culture and not Russification, which means, as Smolensky and family says, he says, the hell with the Russification and with the Frumkeit. No, I spit on both. I spit on the Frum because that's a retarded, meaning a backwards Judaism that's won't attract the youth, doesn't attract me, he said. But I also spit on the assimilationists. So he's a what we call a Zionist. You get it? A Zionist culture. This is what it is. Why am I sharing all this with you? Because the Russian Jewry is not united. You have many different responses, which means that everything I just told you is radically different one from the other. Between Smolensky and Rabbi Yitzchak Spector is an ocean apart. You see? So this is where things were holding. And it's like America today. Because once again, if you ask what's American Jew's reaction to this or that, depends which group you're talking to. Talk about the Orthodox, it'll be this way. Talk about that. What is people's reaction to Trump? This one says this. That one says radically different reactions. Okay? So in other words, the point I'm making is that the old Jewish cultural monolith of Eastern Europe, which lasted for centuries, our ancestors were in Poland and Eastern Europe since the 1500s. Right? The old cultural monolith was gone with the strength that it had implied. Only among the Hasidim would you really find a monolithic approach, at least to some extent. So all the Lubavitchers were the same. You know what I'm saying? All the whatever, Chernobyl or Hasidim, all that. The Hasidim in general have an approach. But among the rest of Russian Jewry, you really often found, in the 19th century already, and certainly in the 20th century, and there are novels like this. 3 sons. One becomes a Rosh Hashiva, one becomes a revolutionary, and one becomes a bourgeois, something or other, or becomes a non-Jew. You see? And it's not atypical at all what I just said. And you say, I guess, how can it be that from the same house came Yaakov and Esav? Well, from the same house came Yaakov and Esav. It's as old as the Bible. You see? And so there you had Russia going through all this. So what is the best future policy for Russian Jewry? There was profound disagreement on this. Where do we go? What do we do to try to make sure there are no new pogroms or try to get the government to treat us better? What is the plan? Now, demographically, that's the last part I touched on. I'll tell you something people don't know. We're dealing with a sextupling of the Jewish population in 100 years. Do you understand what I just said? The Jewish population increased by 6 between 1800 and 1900. That's unbelievable. To my knowledge, there's nothing like that since the biblical period of Parava Yeshur Tzevayir. Okay? The Russians were aghast. The Jews did not know how to adjust their own much larger population. So the Goyim didn't know how to handle this. It was an explosion of population. and the Jews didn't. Look what you have. It's 1 million in 1800. It's 6 million in 1900. Isn't that amazing? And you won't let them out of the Pale Settlement. So area that was already crowded in 1800, tell me what it's like in 1900. You see? And if you're the Russians, like, you see? And they weren't Hitler, so then what do you do? What do you do? They didn't know what to do. They're going crazy. So I'm just trying to tell you, most people don't pay attention to demographics and population size, but it's really enormously important. And a Kehillah, for example, that worked for 50 families can't work the same way for 5,000 families. You see? The Arab countries today are going through turmoil like the Arab Spring and the others because they have a baby boom of their own. And there's not enough schools and not enough health care and not enough bathrooms, not enough this to handle the population. So if you have an explosion of population, there has to be an equal growth in economic opportunities, in food, schooling, and all those other kind of things. And there wasn't any of that. And so naturally there was a gigantic crisis. And people knew it. They didn't know how to analyze it the way I just told you about the population. But nevertheless, they felt it. When I was a kid, this town had so and so many Jews. Now they're all over the place. That's how they talked. You understand? So, okay, that leaves us at 1881. When not only do the pogroms break out, which could happen because of, spasmodic violence, a pogrom you could hear once in a while could come a riot. We have them in Baltimore. But they saw the government and the broad Russian society were justifying and supporting the pogroms. That was the shock. You understand? Like I said before, if somebody, God forbid, let's say a Jew got mugged, look what happened. If the press and everybody said, oh, it's a good thing, he deserved it, all the Jews do, that'd be a different thing. That's a different thing. You understand? The event itself was bad. But the reaction to the event was 1,000,000 times worse. Because what did it portend for the rest of the society? This generalized reaction, notice that they saw all across the board, with very few exceptions, from all the Russian Gentiles, came as a shock to the 4 or 5 million Jews in the Pale Settlements. Like I said before, criminals you have once in a while. Drunken peasants went crazy, I get it. That the army, the government, the police, the church, the newspapers, in fact, some of the liberal newspapers who didn't want to look like the Jew lovers were also saying, listen, we're not in favor of violence. Well, listen, you got to admit the Jews kind of brought on themselves like that. So all these golden calves, all these illusions kept, which I say destroyed. Now, what's the result to seeing these surrounded by all this hatred that people you thought were at least neutral? Well, once again, it depends. If you're frum, you react like we saw last week, like the Kovna circle, with Yitzhak Han Inspector and Yaakov Lifshitz, all the rest of it. He's like this, let's be practical. Practical means like this, let's see who we can bribe, and second, we'll get the word out to put pressure on the government, because you're dealing with a bunch of bums. You're not shocked. After all, Halacha l'Moshe Misina, Esav son Yaakov. Anti-Semitism Esav was always going to hate Yaakov. And therefore that's what you got in Russia, and it'll never get better. They are who they are. The Russians are bad. So are the others. The Russians are just a little worse. And a Jew lives in Golos. That's how they talked. You see, a Jew lives in Golos. And what did our ancestors do when they faced those situations? Let's copy them. Doron, Tfil, Mechon, all that business. Especially Doron. You gotta put the money together and realize you get this minister in there, you get another minister in there, one's better, one's worse. The system will never get better. I mean, I can tell you right now, somebody like Rabbi Yitzhak Inspector or people like that didn't lose any sleep over the anti-Semitism that was revealed in the Russian public opinion. Well, no shock to them. Okay? And in general, there's an old Jewish tradition, Fanya Ganov, every Ivan is a Ganov. You understand? Including the Tsar. There's no difference between the drunken peasant you see on the left-hand side and the Tsar of Russia on the other hand side. This is the old Frum approach. You get it? Allah Shakurim, Allah Ganovim, Allah Rutzchim, that kind of language. You follow? So, okay, whatever. You're not going to be surprised. Now, there's even a Jewish culture. The Chavetz Chaim is a famous saying on, he lived there, right? Chavetz Chaim lived right in the middle of Russia, born 1839, I think. So what is he? 41, 42 when the riots hit? Okay? So, he's in White Russia, so this is not where it hit, but, you know what's going on. And here's a famous thing where it says in the Torah, that you will, one of the curses in the passage in Torah on Deuteronomy where it talks about bad things that will befall Jewish people is you'll be attacked by a people whose language you do not understand. What does that mean? Wherever the Jews go, they understand the language, said the Chavetz Chaim. So if the Jews were in Spain, they learn Spanish. If they're in France, they learn French. What does it mean? They won't understand the language. The Chavetz Chaim says the Russians, why? Because they say, show me your passport, which really means give me a bribe of 10 rubles. You know, they say one thing and mean another. So they're not shocked over the fact that the true Jew hatred comes out on occasions like the pogroms. But if you're not from, then it's a different story. If you're a 19th century and a Russian Jew in the Pale settlement, and you're not, then you have created illusions over the last several decades of enlightenment, Russification, acceptance, liberalism, a new Judaism, etc. And all of these illusions were shattered by the events of 1881. I mean the pogroms and the reaction to the pogroms that I just described. And so the big question was like that famous, This is a Hanan. And he was a famous essay called Avdus B'toch Cherus. That's one of his most famous essays. And he was in Odessa right when all this happened. And what's it talking about? The Jews in the West got emancipation, but they're enslaved mentally. Because a French Jew is scared to do the slightest thing that would make him seem not French. And the German Jew is scared to do the slightest thing that would make him seem not German. Even to the point of chucking his religion. You understand? We'll reform the service, reform the temple, change the dress, change all the rest of it. So you've had emancipation, but not inner emancipation. Whereas he said the Jews in Russia have Cherus B'toch Avdus. We have no emancipation. So we are avodim, but we are proud that we have the inner Jewish strength. Right? So he, even though he wasn't religious, because he wasn't, but he grew up religious, by the way. He's a relative of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Chorkov Rebbe. But he understood, the traditionalist Russian Jewish mentality. But as I said before, if you're not, then all the illusions were destroyed. And so, like the famous Russian novel, the question becomes, what is to be done? Right? That's the most famous Russian novel of the mid-19th century. What is to be done? So, it depends who you are. Russian Jewry is 5 million, 4 million, 5 million by that time. That's a mass of people. What do their leadership say? Well, who are the leaders in Russia? Well, the rich and the powerful leaders in Russia. They were morally bankrupt. They revealed their moral bankruptcy during the reaction to the pogroms. Right? They're of no help. This is the two Polka brothers. The one on the right is Baron Gunsberg. These are rich and powerful, when I say powerful, they're very wealthy Jewish millionaires who are allowed to live in St. Petersburg. They are allowed to live in Moscow. It's very unusual. Just you. Okay? And Vysotsky, the millionaires. Well, if they're millionaires, they should be able to intercede on behalf of their brother. They didn't know what to do. They went to the Tsar and they said, it's a bad idea for the pogroms. The Tsar said, it's your fault. It's not really our fault. Please do something. I'll think about it. Oh, he said he'll think about it. This really happened, right? He said he'll think about it. They gave a press release. The Tsar said he'll think about it. Count Ignatieff said, why don't you leave in the West? No, you don't really mean that. Why don't you let us in the other way? I doubt it. Let me think. Oh, Count Ignatieff, you see what I'm saying? And they told the other Jews, turn the other cheek, make no trouble. Remember the old classic joke, which is a sad joke about the Jew who's being taken from the firing squad. 2 Jews were about to be shot. And one says, I don't like this. The other one said, don't make any trouble. You see? So that's exactly what the rich people do. Well, listen, I want to tell you something. It's a flunkyism. That's what it's being a flunky. But that's the trouble with rich people, rich Jews all the time. They cannot help but think about their own personal situation. But don't ever rely on rich, like King David says, Al tifshu medivim, because they don't think of you. They think of themselves. That they may call themselves the heads of the Jewish community, or the intercessors, or the lobbyists, or all the rest of it. But the bottom line is, the American Jews didn't want to help the Jews in Europe in World War II because they thought it would be bad for the Jews in America. You understand? The people are always thinking of their own personal, benefits. And this certainly demonstrated itself. Maybe with a famous and shocking and disgusting display of moral bankruptcy, the well-to-do Jews in Russia in the 1880s. Look, at least they didn't convert. I mean, plenty others went all the way. And just to totally kiss up to Russians, they became Christian. Plenty like that. So Baron Gunsberg and the others said, listen, I support Jewish causes. Let me tell you something. He gave money to yeshivas. He also gave money to many other things. So, what are you dumping on me for? Right? I didn't convert. At least they clearly rejected the charges that the pogroms were caused by Jewish exploitation. Like that flunky they weren't. Okay? Baron Gunsberg said to the Tsar, really? What about the Greeks, the Armenians, the Germans, and all the other minorities that are always claimed to be fleecing the poor, dumb Russian peasantry? Because you see, the Russian Tsars allowed in not only Jews, but others into the Russian Empire and in bigger areas than the Jews, because the Russians were not good at business. And so who built up Odessa? The Greeks and the Armenians. And they're a lot smarter in business than the Jews. There's a famous old, if you went back 100 years ago, he used to say, one Jew is like 10 Russians, smart like 10 Russians. 10 Jews, smart like one Greek. 10 Greek, smart like one Armenian. They had to be very clever and feature. My father, when I was a little kid, I remember them all, telling Armenian jokes, meaning how clever and smart they are. Right? How come there's no pogroms against the Armenians or the Greeks or the Germans or, I forget, all the other minorities that were located in the southern part of Russia, who have such advantageous economic positions in society? They live all off the sweat and the brow of the others, and nobody says boo about it. And the Jews. That's what Gunsberg said. So he wasn't a total flunky, right? No, it's not because they're fleecing somebody else. The reason that they rioted against them, the reason they killed them and raped them, is the fault of the perceived helplessness and vulnerability of the peace-loving Jews. It's precisely because the Jews don't fight back. That's why you want to beat them up and kill them and rape them. In other words, it's a bunch of Russian bullying junk. And don't give me any kinds of, justification. Now, he didn't use those words to the Russian officials. But that's what it boils down to. So, bottom line, what do the rich Jews of Russia advise the other Jews to do? Beg. Petition the authorities, appeal to their good reason, try to be extra nice, that sort of thing, right? Promote enlightenment, basically a certain form of wait till the storm passes. And as I said before, this results in their own particular interests and their blinkered mentality, because life was good for them. I mean, why did Gunsberg really dislike the pogroms? Messed up, a good lifestyle. What about the regular poor Jews, the millions of them, in the danger zone, in the southeast Pale settlement? They adopted a different policy. Because the rich Jews all said like this: don't do anything unpatriotic. Show you're super law-abiding citizens, and show you're super loyal to the government, and super evident as are, and that will cause, if not today, then tomorrow or the day after, the Tsar to change his mind. The regular people out there who are living in danger, not only the people who are in the towns that were pogroms, but the one with the cousins living elsewhere, and the other ones living not far away, and all over that particular area, they adopted a different attitude. Not the attitude of Yaakov with Esav, but rather the attitude of Yaakov and Lavan. What did Jacob do to Esau? He prepared himself for Doran Fil Mechama, old Jewish teaching, we all know, right? To pay him off, to fight if necessary, to tefillah. What did Yaakov do with Lavan? None of that. Hit the road. Vayivrach. Getting out of here. Which is interesting. I guess you could make a Dvar Torah out of that. But it's interesting. He said, I'm not going and contending with Lavan. I'm leaving. So these Jews did that. To the patriotic admonitions of the rich Jews of St. Petersburg to stay in Russia, the masses display a healthy indifference. Doesn't work, does it?
President Kennedy has already sent a message in the teletype. He wired Khrushchev, get out of Berlin, get out of Vietnam, and get out of Cuba. Khrushchev wired back, never mind that, how can I get out of Russia?
That's what everybody in Russia is saying in 18... Well, if you're living in those danger zones, that's what you're saying. How do I get out of Russia? You can't go and give me Musar in the... They said, don't do something unpatriotic. My town could be the next one hit. And I know what happened to my cousin's cousin, Sarala. I know what happened to my daughter. Okay? I'm getting out of here. And so they run to the nearest border, which is not that far away if you know Eastern Europe. Let's go. And as you see, I don't have my pointer. As you see over here, here's Austria. Here is the Austrian Empire. And right next to it is Russia. The Austrian Empire, and right next to it is Russia. Eastern Galicia, the area of Lemberg and all that, is not far away. And so they run to the territory of Franz Josef, because there's not anti-Semitism. It's pretty bad if you got to run to Poland to escape anti-Semitism. Okay? But that's what it was. And so the border town, Brody, which is a famous Jewish city, has a majority Jewish population. Brody is a very well-known city. Gets flooded, starting here from one after another family after family. They're just showing up and running away because they're scared of the pogroms. And if you get on the Austrian side, there's no violence. You understand? So they ran away to Franz Josef. Now, this freaks out the Jewish communities in the West because there's too many of them coming in. It creates a humanitarian crisis like you have today with the border in America. Where do you have beds? Where do you have toilets? And where do you have food and all the rest of it? There was no plan to take care of this. This happened spontaneously, obviously, right? The Jewish organizations try to cope, but they do so with all the negatives of the European Jewish organization, very vague or patronizing, all the rest of it. Not the right ones. Don't you think you should go back home? It's a little bit too much over here. I wouldn't advise you go to America. I wouldn't advise you go to Germany. All that kind of stuff. What can I tell you? The Jewish masses don't pay attention to them because the gap is too wide. As King David says, do not trust in the divim, in rich people. And the left is Lord Swathing Montague, who is the Shomer Shabbos, was a rich Jew in London, and he looks at it from the point of view of the rich Jews. And the guy on the left is the famous Baron Hirsch. Right? All those institutions named after Baron Hirsch, who was completely not from, and was a generous guy. He gave a lot of money in charitable causes, but usually for the wrong cause. I'm talking about Judaically, usually for the wrong causes. But I'll say this: he sends food, right? I mean, the guy was loaded. He sent food. Lord Samuel came himself to judge the situation, and he said, "It's a humanitarian crisis. I think many should go home. It's not as bad as you think." So even if he was a frum guy, it was no good. Okay? Now, where are they supposed to go if they're not going to go back to Russia? This becomes the great problem. Oh my God, the Jews in Western Europe freak out. Don't come to Germany. I thought you have a free and civil rights over here. Barely, we're walking a tightrope. Don't come to Germany. Don't come to France. And eventually the other countries. You're going to make it worse. It's a human flood. They do not listen. Just like today with Trump. Okay? So once upon a time, we were them. It's just like with Trump. Okay? Now, where are you going to go? By the way, they do not go to South Africa. The Jews go to South Africa not from the pogroms, because the gold rush later. That's what brings them in from Lithuania. You were asking me about the other day. The answer, of course, as we know, is they go to the USA. The good old USA. And even the most famous Maskilic poet, Yalag, Yudalev Gordon, writes, Achosi Ruchama, that's his sister, Ruchama, meaning Rachman, who deserves to be pitied, and who's been violated, as he says over there, and Ona Ola Charposi, where shall I take my shame, like the biblical woman who was raped. And finally, by the end, in the last paragraph, he said, go to America. Kumi nilecha b'mokum ora chofesh, yizrach al kol basar yer kol shev nefesh. Go to the country in which the light of freedom and liberty shines on all people. So he's not thinking of Israel, he's thinking of the USA. And the idea is like this. My sister has been violated and abused. She needs a place to recover and get a normal life. She doesn't need a place of challenge and tsaris and kibbutzim and all the rest of it. He said, you know what I'm saying? So you go to America. Which everybody, of course, viewed as a golden Medina, as we all know. And they thought once you land in New York, all problems are over. This was not true. But from a certain perspective, it was true. From a certain perspective, it was true. When you land in America, it's the end of all legal anti-Semitism. Yeah? There was no legal anti-Semitism. You could have let me tell you something. I don't let you in my country club. That's nothing in Russia. Doesn't garnish, you know. I don't like the way you dress. I don't want you living next door to me. Doesn't garnished, right? Compared to what we've been describing over here. Can you go to school? Can you go to college? Can you get a degree? Can you get a profession? Can you go to any business you want? Can you move wherever you want? Do you understand what? Can you breathe? This is big. Okay? And so, as a result, starting in 1881, and I want to clarify this in my remarks tonight because many people get this wrong. Starting in 1881, you begin a 30-year period in which is a gigantic immigration from the Russian Empire into America. Here are the numbers. Now look closely, all the way starting on the left. In 1881, it's 5,000. It's not much at all. In 1882, is 13,000. These are not huge numbers. So in the years of the actual pogroms, the numbers were not so big. The next year, 1883, is only 8,000. The next year is 11, then 16. By 1886, you start to get a little bit of numbers, but not gigantic. It's 20,000, 30,000, 33,000, 28, 25. You see what I'm saying? 28, 1891 is a big leap. Okay? In the 90s, it goes to 50, to 70, and then down again, down again, down again, down again, down again. So it's funny. My point is as follows. It's not true, as a result of pogroms, all the Jews of Russia picked up and came to America. It's much more complicated than that. It was a spark plug or something that started a process which expended itself over 30 years and would have gone longer if not for the First World War. So it started something, right? An avalanche. But it didn't pick up. Everybody came at one time. It's only when you get in the third column to 1900, especially 1901, as I'll explain in a minute, then you get Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, the numbers shoot up. Look at 1901, 58,000, 57, 76,000, 106, 129. That's a year. That's a year. 130, what is it? 129, 153, 150,000 Jews came to New York in 1 year, in 12 months. You understand? That's Teddy Roosevelt. 149, what do you get over there? 103, 50, and so on and so forth. By the way, look at 1911, 1912, 250,000 people. 1913, 1914, another quarter. 250,000 in like 18 months. Do you see where I'm going with this? How long? That's 30 years after the pogroms. It's 30 years after the pogroms. So it's not a simplistic equation that this happened and everybody moved. It started to start. A process which eventually, over a course of many decades, unfolded and developed into a gigantic immigration. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, the USA was, so to speak, the land of unlimited immigration in those days. Who would think that we'd be talking about this in the time of Trump? But it's not so simple. You understand what I'm saying? In those days, there were no quotas or anything along those lines. The U.S. had policies that someone with a disease, a venereal disease, a mental illness, that kind of stuff, communicable can't come in. But, those kind of regulations you had. Someone who's mentally ill, that kind of thing. But ordinarily, you could come in, okay? It didn't matter who is. It's all white, by the way. He's a European, okay? But the racism at that time was different types of European. Western European is okay. Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, that's no good. You understand? Now, anyway, it's not so simple. The German Jews that were in this country at that time, and in 1881 there were 250,000 German Jews here, and the WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, did not look happily on what they were seeing, a big immigration. Even though you and I just saw that right away it was not a big immigration. It was 5,000 and then 10,000. I mean, they're not gigantic numbers. That came later. All of a sudden, there starts in the United States, WASP exclusionary societies and organizations are formed. Restriction bills are now offered in Congress. And the Reformed Jews in America were not exactly sure what to do. Because on the one hand, they don't want a huge immigration of Jews in the country because it will cause anti-Semitism here and make it look funny. We're doing fine. By the time you get to the 1880s, the Reformed Jews have gotten rid of the original immigrant stuff. It's the second generation. They're making the department stores. And frankly, that's what they're doing. They're making the department store. I don't know of a single city I can think of that didn't have Reformed Jewish department stores, including Baltimore, obviously, but every other town. So they're doing guns fine. Or they're manufacturing to sell to the department stores. They're okay. They're Republicans. You know what I'm saying? They're doing fine. And here come these guys with the funny looking beards and the funny looking this and the women with the thing, with the tickle and all, you know. No, I'm saying they said, what do we need this for? On the other hand, they were still Jewish and it didn't sit well with them to tell somebody to go back to Russia. It didn't sit either. It's an interesting story. One Reformed Jew, Simon Wolf, you see over here? Okay. Who is an unlikely hero but a hero, was a one-man show, a Kachleffel, and he was a prominent Republican Jew, a German Jewish immigrant who came back in the 1850s or something like that. And early on, he joined the Republican Party, and early on, he became a political factotum. You know, so one of these guys that gets in, with the party politics. In the time I'm talking about, you still had the good old USA spoil system, right? President gets elected, you fire the whole government, and you put in new people. Now, it started to be modified in the 1880s, after the pogroms, by what they call Civil Service Reform Acts. But still, there are plenty of jobs out there. So a lot of people, you can make your whole career, what are you for a living? I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. No. That's how you got a job in the courthouse. That's how your cousin got a job in the customs house. This guy listen, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, when D'Alessandro was there, they had two guys in the city hall pushing the elevator. One to push it up, one to push it down. This was his third cousin. This was his fifth cousin. Shouldn't be overworked. Okay, they had it. I remember in the Sun paper they asked D'Alessandro. He had two cousins sitting in front of the room in front of the mayor's office. What is their job? Because they had a city job. He says, if there's an earthquake and the dome ever starts to shake, they're supposed to warn me. This is how business was done once upon a time. So Simon Wolf came up in the Republican Party. He was actually close with all the presidents, with Lincoln, with Grant, with Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, and all the rest of them through his career. And he was appointed a judge in Washington by Grant, and he was a consul in Egypt and all this kind of business. He was one of these guys. And obviously he wasn't from, but on the other hand, he was a good Jew, right? He was a good Jew. And he said like this, somebody has to stand up for the immigrants. Okay? And he knew, because of the person I just described, the ins and outs of the federal government of that time. And he knew who's the undersecretary of this, and he was tight with the president and the vice presidents and all the rest of it. And so basically, he became a self-appointed lobbyist, you say, for Klal Yisrael. That's what he was. Here is President Chester Arthur. Up there is President, Benjamin Harrison. And then the secretaries of state, because they are in charge of immigration. The guy on the left is James G. Blaine. Do you remember that from high school? The Continental Liar from the state of Maine. And anyway, twice a presidential candidate. Very famous Republican politician once upon a time, who said we have too many people coming into the country, too many of these Jews. Right? And the one on the right is John Foster. His grandson was John Foster Dulles. See? And so he knew all these guys because they all came up in the Republican Club. And I'll tell you right now, he was able to protect the interests of these thousands of Jews coming all the time, that they shouldn't be turned around and kicked out. Right? That they shouldn't be turned around and kicked out under a whole variety of excuses. Some were, but the overwhelming majority were not. Okay? And that's because the federal government was willing to be flexible in the 1880s and the 1890s. Fortunately for him, for a lot of those two terms, for a lot of the 1880s and 90s was Grover Cleveland, and he was a friend of the immigrant. He was a Democrat with a small d and a big D. Okay? Governor of New York. Very honest person. Is famous for honest. And he vetoed a bunch of bills that the exclusionary societies got through Congress, because he said America was built on free immigration. Okay? It doesn't matter what he didn't say race, color, because that time race mattered. But he said, but it doesn't matter, what the religion is. Let's put it that way, okay? And so, between these guys, they prevented the closing of the doors that could have happened. And Simon Wolf was able to make the case to John Foster and some others on the following basis. The laws were, you can't come into the country if you're brought in by relatives, but on the other hand, you have to have people that will be affidavits for you, that you won't be a burden on the economy. All these Jews are coming from Russia. They don't have no rich relatives or anything like that. So he said to the federal government, he said, you know the Jews, and since we've been here before George Washington, we take care of our own poor. That is the history of the Jewish people in America. Which means the Jews have never in this country allowed their own poor to be a burden on the general community. This is the origin, let's go to the next one, of like the associateds and that sort of thing, the federations, the Jewish charities, okay? Which means that we have, and you know this, I'm not lying when I say it. I mean, you know, you, John Foster, know this. He said the Jews have a whole network of organizations where everybody goes, the Jewish community, charitable organizations of New York and Philadelphia and Boston and Cleveland and Pittsburgh and everywhere, right? And always have been. And the idea is we handle our own. So the Jews in America are telling you that they are the relative, they're the guarantors of all these immigrants coming through. That's a stretch. That's a stretch. But John Foster was willing to do it. Okay? So both of them were, let's put it this way. It's a good old USA. Because they did not have to do that. And as a result, they never closed down the immigration, even though what I just told you is not really true. And he even promised, Simon Wolf, that the Jewish organization will do their best to scatter the immigrants not in a few big cities, but all across the country. And this is why they try to make people move to Galveston, you've heard about that, and the far west and the Midwest. But as we know, 3 million Jews packed into the Lower East Side wasn't exactly a big success. 250,000 Jews packed into Philly, 250,000 Jews, 250,000 packed into Boston. I don't know how many packed in the other, the small groups of Jews scattered throughout the country didn't exist. You had large urban masses, which is not really, I won't say they kept their bargain, but the federal government never did anything about it. That's what I'm saying. The federal government never did anything about it. And as a result, you had what I called you the golden years, when Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, the guy in the middle is Oscar Strauss, who was appointed by Teddy Roosevelt in charge of immigration. He was Secretary of Labor and Commerce. At that time, the Immigration Bureau was located within the Department of Labor and Commerce. So if he appointed a Jew, who by the way was an immigrant from Germany, if he appointed a Jew to be the Secretary of Labor and Commerce, what it means is there'll be no anti-Semitism practiced in Ellis Island because somebody's Jewish, and the Ellis Islands around the country. Right? So that's, and Taft, who came after him, who was a great friend of the Jewish people, appointed somebody similar. He was not Jewish, but he was married to the sister of Louis Brandeis. So his wife was Jewish. So he's not going to do anything, once again, anti-Semitically. And that's why you get those big numbers that I showed you in the chart before. 250,000 in a year and a half. 150,000 in some of those years. These are huge numbers. This is a lot of my parents came here after the Second World War. But I bet you in this audience, there are plenty of you, the parents came earlier. And this is how it happened. Okay? So again, I'm trying to point out over here that it's the numbers grew slowly and organically over 30 years. They're not the immediate result of the pogroms of 1881. Rather, the pogroms were the spark plug. As time went on, immigration took a life of its own because my father moved to America. Within a few years, he writes to me, he says, I'm already set up well enough, I can bring you over. And if things are okay, I can bring my wife also. And it might take 5 years, and I can bring my kids. And if you do all right, and you set up a successful store somewhere, you can even bring your parents eventually. So that's called a chain immigration. And that's what they did. Like I said before, I'm not interviewing the people who are here today, but I bet you many of you have family backgrounds along those lines. One came over and brought the others when they were financially able to do so. So, again, I want you to understand the pogroms as being the beginning of a process, not the process. Now, usually there's a myth. So there was an 1881 pogroms, all Jews ran away from Russia and came to America. It's much more complicated than that. But the significance of the spark plug is enormous. It's gigantic. More than even I just showed you over here. The pogroms changed the mentality of Eastern European Jews who until then did not think of moving. Mentality, frame of mind is so important. Because a lot of times you say, why did you do this? Why didn't you do that in life? First thing, no good reason. You understand? No good reason. So, let me ask you the question. Let's go to the next one. Why did the Jews run away when they were kidnapping the kids in the Russian army in the time of Nicholas I? And all those terrible things that were going on there. You could have come to America in those days. In the 1820s, 30s, 40s. That's the age of Andrew Jackson. It was a free immigration over here. How come the Russian Jews at that time said this? They kidnapped my child, put him in the army for 20 years. They put other gzeros on there. They closed down the shuls. All the things that we talked about that Nicholas I was doing. I'll go to America. Get it over with. Nobody did it. Why nobody do it? You know why nobody did it? Because nobody does it. It's a mentality. We're all prisoners of our cultural context. Nobody does it, so you don't do it. Right? How come in Baltimore everybody lives up to Glen Avenue and nobody buys a house across the street on the other side? Well, nobody does it. Right? Hey, here's a real estate person. Sharon will tell you the house is half the price. Right? Half the price. And you're a block away from the same shul. Why don't you do it? Nobody does it. We're all prisoners of this mentality. The Hasidim, for example, stayed in Germany until Hitler. Why didn't they leave earlier? Why didn't they go to countries of freedom where you could be as Hasidic as you want, like America or Canada or places like that? Very, very few did that, right? How come? Why did they stay in Eastern Europe in places like Belz and all the things until the Holocaust? Because you don't go. Right? You don't move. Why don't you move? Because you don't move. But it doesn't make any sense. You don't do it. So the pogroms of 1881, for some reason, there's like a shock in the brain, right? Like I say, a spark plug. A shock. And all of a sudden, Jews in Europe started to say, I don't have to stay here. I could go somewhere else. Why am I living in a country where they don't like me? I'll go to a country where I can do much better. Is it a crime what I just said, or is it common sense? Why the heck should I stay over here? That sequence of thinking, for some reason, didn't kick into people's minds until 1881. Isn't it funny? Once that happened, 4 or 5 million Jews got the heck out of Russia and those places and were spared the Holocaust. It's funny. So you can say, if you're very religious, you say Yad Hashem. Yeah. But did the process. Jews stayed in Poland and didn't move anywhere in Eastern Europe, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and even into the 1800s until 1881. 50 years later came Hitler. So 50 years before was a certain, like a bang in the head, and all of a sudden, lots and lots of people said, let's leave. And had World War I not broken out, which is a great tragedy, look at those numbers. Another 250,000, instead of 4 or 5 million Jews in America, you have 10. And Hitler would have nobody to kill. So, you know what I mean when I say that. Much less. So why not? Look how mentalities play such a gigantic role in people's even survival. By the way, you know and I know, and I bet you know people, the Rays will tell you for sure, how many people already when the Germans were there nearby, they could have run away. And they didn't run away, right? They could have done it. The Germans are there. Because you don't go. You wake up in the morning, you go to shul, you go to your business, and you don't go. So that's the great significance as I see it in what happened after the pogroms in 1881. So it's truly huge, as President Trump would say. And it really is. And it really is. Okay? Now, by the way, not everybody went to America. Look at England, UK. 1882, there were only 46,000 Jews in the whole UK. London, Liverpool, the Guns and Business, Manchester. And within a few years, from 46, triple, right? 46,000, 125,000, which means almost 80,000 poured in the 1880s. This is where you get the big neighborhoods in London, the Whitechapel and all the rest of it. Within another 10 years, another 100,000. 225. So England's gone from less than 50,000 to 250,000. And within another 10 years, to 75,000 until finally get to 300,000, which is why England became such a large area. Why are they going to England? It's closer to America, and it's still an English-speaking country, and there's no anti-Semitism when you compare it to what's over there. Right? Like I said before, what they won't let you into the club, big deal. You know what I'm saying? Why Winston Churchill said something about the bloody Jews, but that's garnished. You follow? Those are garnished. I've been beaten up by experts in the prison say, this is nothing, okay? And so, I want to tell you, did I mention over here? I was 2 weeks ago with Ari Elbaum and Heather in the Bevis Mark Synagogue. Did I mention this over here? And as the guy said, this is the oldest continual shul. Since 1701, there's always been a minyan every day. That's England. Right? Speaks well under the British Crown. Right? It's 320 years almost. Every day, davening. There's never been a government shutdown or a Hitler or a Stalin or something like that. Interesting. Now, same thing in France. The population, a lot of Jews ran away not to England, not to America, they ran out of France. And the population tripled from 80,000 to almost 250,000. That's a ton of Jews moving to Paris. Okay? A ton of Jews in a place like that. And looking back from our perspective today, the result of this, the main result would be the creation of an entirely new Metzias, an entirely new factor that never before existed in Jewish history, in the 3,000-year-old history of our people. It's called American Jewish community, American Jewry. It's a brand new thing. As a large community, we're very recent. Now it's 2019. I'm taking you back 150 years. Before it didn't exist. The largest Jewish community in Jewish history. There's never been a community of 5 million, 6 million, right? So, we're as big as they were in Russia. It's the most powerful community in Jewish history. I'll say it again. The most powerful community, politically powerful community in Jewish history. These other communities in Europe and places, they have no power. They could perhaps appeal, lobby, beg, all that kind of stuff. America's a different story. The Russians themselves were shocked because in 1905, which is right in the middle of the period I'm talking about, came the Russian-Japanese War, and Russia got beat bad by the Japanese, and they had the peace conference in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, presided by Teddy Roosevelt, and the Russian delegate to the peace conference, where Russia basically had to give in to Japan, that's what happened, was they gave to them Korea and some other things, was Count Witte, Sergei Witte, who was the prime minister under Tsar Nicholas II, and a big macher under Alexander III. That's Witte of it in the middle. You can see him on the extreme left, 2 people away from Teddy Roosevelt. Okay? A very famous person. And Teddy Roosevelt arranged for him. He said, I'd like to hear what the American Jews have to say over here. Because they elected me, helped elect me. And so he had a conference with Jacob Schiff, the richest American Jew, who was the big macher on Wall Street, who lost the war to Russia, meaning he caused Russia to lose the war. One of the reasons Russia lost the war, they had money. And therefore they couldn't supply, it's notorious, read up on the Russian-Japanese war. They couldn't supply weapons, they couldn't supply food, there was a single railroad bringing the supplies from Russia all the way to, Vladivostok, all the way to the Far East. So the Russian army was always on a string, and as soon as the war happened, they hit the money markets of the world, the financial centers, particularly at that time Wall Street. In other words, a government has to borrow $1 billion. I don't have $1 billion. You got $1 billion to spare? You got to go to the big boys. And that meant London, Paris, and New York. That's the bottom line. And who's the big macher in London? It was Baring and Rothschild. So Rothschild not going to give him any money? And Baring didn't have enough. They gave him some, they lent him some, didn't have enough. I forget how it worked in Paris, but also they were heavily invested in Russia already in the civilian sector. So boiled down to Wall Street. And Jacob Schiff was one of the big movers and shakers in Wall Street. And he prevented Russia from getting any loans. Therefore, they couldn't fight the war. But on the other hand, he opened up totally the pocketbook to Japan. As soon as the war started, went to see the Japanese. He said, tell me what you need, how much you need, and when you need it. They wrote up it was a financially sound loan. They took out a formal, whatever they do, and the guarantee, and they paid it up. This is why Jacob Schiff was made a baron in Japan in 1906 when he went over there. It's one of the reasons, I talked about it before, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons they didn't kill the Mir Yeshiva in Shanghai. You understand? To use language that you'll understand. Or they didn't kill the Jewish community in Shanghai. Because in part of the Japanese mentality, not all of it, part of it was the Jews did Japan a favor, and second of all, the rich and powerful, maybe we better stay on their good side. Because Jacob Schiff helped us. Okay? And the Russians knew this, and being the bullies that they are, Count Witte went to Schiff, and he said, okay, the war's over, and we lost. Now give Russia a big loan to help us recover from the defeat. You understand? And look what Witte writes in his memoirs, which he would not publish in his lifetime. He buried in the bank, and he died like in 1912, something like that. and it was in a bank in Paris, and it was only published in 1921. Okay, because he was afraid of saying things that are politically incorrect in Tsarist Russia. And look what he wrote. I never met a Jew like Schiff. Of course not. Proud, dignified, conscious of his power, he declared to me solemnly that as long as the Tsar's government would continue anti-Jewish policy, Schiff would exert every effort to make it impossible for Russia to get a kopeck in the United States. You understand? And he banged the table with his fist and declared that a government which indulged in massacres and inhumane persecution on religious grounds was not to be trusted. So you're not even a good credit risk. Now I want to tell you something. He saved his investors a lot of money. Why? Did Russia ever pay up the debts from the Russian-Japanese War? Tell me why not. The communists took over 12 years later and they repudiated all the debts. So anybody who lends his Tsarist money, bye-bye. Right? Now that's already a sermon. But I'm just saying, no. What does that mean? Within 20 years of the pogrom, you have a powerful American Jewish community, which is like the French Jews would never say this, the German Jews would never do that, the British Jews would never do it. Even Rothschild wouldn't lend the money, did very quietly. He just said, no thank you, I don't want to be part of all this. This is America. I hate Russia. I don't mind telling you, I hate Russia. You know why? Because you murder my people. Because you crush them. Because you put in all these laws. Why should I not hate you? What, am I not normal? You should spit all over me, I should like you? And they weren't used to this. You see what he said? He's not met anybody like this. Well, all he said was 1 + 1 = 2. Day is day and night is night. He didn't say anything on, no, to Russia, you're not allowed to talk to somebody like that. You get it? So this is what I mean when I say that the results of these mass immigration created the most powerful Jewish community ever. Certainly the richest and most generous Jewish community by far in Jewish history. Obviously, 5-6 million Jews are going to have more money than the others. But second of all, I can tell you this, Jews throughout history were generous to a certain degree, but usually not so generous. I wish it were not the case. The American Jews is, by and large, especially even today, by and large in the old days, give a whole lot more money for charitable causes, especially help Jews overseas, Jews in trouble, than any other Jewish community that I know about in history. Okay? And so I put the Joint Distribution Committee, which was formed in World War I, of all Jewish parties, the from, the not from, the socialists, the capitalists, all the rest of it. Schiff is there, the Wall Street guys, all the rest, to help the suffering Jews in Eastern Europe who were starving. We talked about this a month ago. Literally starving. And they set up everywhere soup kitchens, which means you have to pay money every day. It was 365 days a year of soup kitchens, which lasted until Hitler, because when the First World War was over, the poverty was still there, and the need was still there, and the American Jews never said, when will this end? When we close this down? They never said that. Because everybody had an uncle and a cousin and something like this back in the old country, and how can you turn somebody down and say, a Jew shouldn't be able to eat? I think I told you this. I was in Punovich 2 years ago in 2017, literally 2 years, now 2 years ago, when I went on that Meshuggah trip. And I went on a whirlwind walk through Punovich, and the lady was there, happened to be an Israeli lady, was showing, it used to be Rehov this, and this was Rehov HaJoint, the Joint Street. Why? That's where the soup kitchens were located. So people already in the 30s who were hungry every day, you could go 3 times a day and get a bowl of soup with stuff in it. Okay? And who paid the check? Who signed the check? You see? The American Jews. And they did it in World War II, and we do it today. And we do not say, as a community, you never hear anybody in the American Jewish community saying, we're spending too much money on charity. I never heard that. You see? I don't care, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, this and that and the other, at least I never seen that. People say, all that money that we did for the Iranian Jews, and for the Ethiopian Jews, and for Israel, the rest of it is too much. You don't hear that. You see? So, the American Jewish community, which is a result of the pogroms and the immigration that happened, it's a brand new phenomenon in Jewish history. Although, let's be honest, it did fail its greatest challenge, which was Hitler, right? They didn't do what they could have done, nowhere near. That's a fact. You cannot deny that. Okay? But they've always fought for Israel. But nowadays it's getting complicated. Right? Remember under Obama when they passed that Iran bill? The American Jewish community for the first time split. as I saw. That was sad. Used to be they were pretty doggone united, and now it's split. Under Trump, it's mamish split. So, regardless of what you hold about specific policies of Obama or Trump, but the splitting of the pretty united stance of American Jew is not a good thing. Okay? Now, that's as far as that result of the pogroms of 1881. The other big one was Zionism, which really actually starts there. I'm only going to have time to start this tonight, so I'll just share a few words and I hope to finish it next time. Usually, as we all know, from Jews were Zionists, but in a passive way. Okay? So, just go back 200 years ago. If you look on the spectrum, some said were Zionists, but Zionists of prayer and charity. Correct? They were, you daven every day, and listen, who daven more kavanah than these people, right? Seriously. And they raised money to help Jews that were in Eretz Yisrael and all that sort of thing. But they didn't do anything in a political kind of a way. Nor did they call for it. But then in the 19th century, in the decades before the pogroms of 1881, you start to see interesting things, but nothing really happens until the pogroms. Some people in the early 1800s started advocating more active measures, but they got no traction. And I'm talking about Rabbonim. So if you see over here, on the left is Shmuel Kalisher, Tzvi Kalisher, who wrote Drishat Zion. He said like this: if the Greeks are having a war of independence and they're getting their country from the Turks, and the Italians are having a national struggle and they're going to in Italy out of it, and the Hungarians are having a struggle and they're going to get a country out of it, and the Polacks and the this one that, what about the Jews? You see? And so his idea was like this: go to Rothschild and buy the whole place. Right? You're loaded, just buy it from the Turks. That wasn't realistic, but but in other words, he's starting to say, let's take this from the realm of just prayer and do something, right? Maybe his idea was good, maybe it was good, but let's do something. One of the right is less known is a Sephardi Rabbi of Alkalai, Yehuda Alkalai. Among the Sephardim, many people don't know this. In Gibraltar, in Morocco, in where he is from, Sarajevo, and places like that, they were very much stirred up by the independence wars in the Balkans and in southern Europe. And they really said, if all these countries are revolting and getting their independence, this must be God's moment when the little peoples can get something out of it. What about the Jewish people? And therefore, let's start moving Jews to Israel. His Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Bebas from Morocco, said, let's train everybody to get weapons. He was real Zionist, Rabbi Alkalai was rabbi of a community in Hungary near Belgrade. Today's part of the city of Belgrade. Doesn't mean anything except among his balabatim were the grandparents of Herzl. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Who later moved to Budapest. So he by the way, big Talmud Chacham. He's writing this from Kabbalistic perspective. If you read his writings, he's very religious. He's coming to this Mashiach side and all the rest of it. And therefore, let's do something to get no traction. Okay? Because he went to Rothschild, he went to Montefiore, he went to this guy, that guy, and they said, this is not a practical kind of idea. The Maskilim in Russia mocked them. You'd think, you're all in favor of Ivrit and Lashon Kodesh, and you want a secular Jewish thing. No. I'm sorry. There's a secular, I forgot that. Totally from a different perspective in the 1860s, Moses Hess is coming from a non-religious. The other guys were rabbis. He is the best friend of Karl Marx. Until they had a falling out. Karl Marx had a falling out with everybody. And Moshe Hess, Morris Hess. And under the influence of German nationalism, German anti-Semitism, almost 100 years, 80 years before Hitler, when nobody saw this, when this is the time of Saint Raphael Hirsch, it was a good time for the German Jews. He said, I see the anti-Semitism it's going to rise one day. Isn't that interesting? In the 1860s, how did anybody see this? And he said, if all the other countries are getting nationalism, the Jews should get it. See, he's atheist. He's a communist. He literally is one of the first communists. He is the guy who helped Karl Marx write the Communist Manifesto in 1848. When I say communist, he is the guy who converted Friedrich Engels to communism. He's from the core there. But he sees past that at a certain point in his life, and he says, the Jews, like everybody else, need a country, because otherwise they'll be exposed to the anti-Semitism of everybody else. Now, as I said before, the Haskalah made fun of all these people. Hewlett Gordon and all the others, they said, that's crazy. Russia is the Zion of the future. You get it? If you go to Eretz Yisrael, the Frum will take over, and it'll be like a Haredi place. It'll be terrible. Better build a Haskalah thing in Russia. But now, after the pogroms in 1881, the Russian Jews have a general shock. All the illusions are popped. Regular people talk about America. But what about the intelligentsia, or the self-proclaimed intelligentsia? The guys that write newspapers, college students, the professionals, all the others. They're supposed to be the thing. In Europe, there's no mass thing. It's a few leaders at the top that do the thinking for everybody else. So these are the guys who declared themselves that element. The intelligentsias, whose predictions had always been proven wrong until now, because they believed in the czars, they believed in Russification, they believed in acceptance, liberalism, and all the rest of it. What is the solution by these geniuses now? Well, several stupid ones were proposed, but the youth, therefore, in Russia, they start going to revolutionary movements. And more, that's what happened. Lots of young Jews said, the heck with it, we'll blow up the whole system. After all, system is messing me over. What do I owe the system? What do I owe the system? Right? They beat me up, they beat my parents up, they beat all of them, they attacked my sister. What do I owe the system? Okay? So, but one solution stands out, and that's Zionism, that the Jews have their own country, although no one knows how to articulate it clearly. Until a person steps forward right after the pogroms, who's a dentist from Odessa, a secular atheist, named Leon Pinsker, and he has his famous pamphlet. If you can read it in German, it says auto-emancipation. We have to emancipate ourselves. Don't be like the German Jews who are always begging to get civil rights. Take civil rights for yourself. How do you take civil rights for yourself? You can't get civil rights in Russia. True. Get your own country. Right? And he was, by the way, a former Moscow who advocated a Jewish future in a more liberal Russia, but he gave up on that. As long as the Jews don't have their own country, and as long as the Jews are more than a tiny, tiny few, because if there's 10 Jews in your country, it's fine. But if there's more than that, then no one will regard them with anything other than hostility. And he has a whole medical analysis, because he was, as I said before, a doctor, and he was a secular person, he was an atheist, he was a modern person, he subscribed to all modern culture, all the rest of it, and he said, people look at the Jews as ghosts. What are you, coming around here? You look like you have a country, hang together with each other, you have common customs, but you don't have no land. What is that? They don't relate to that. Therefore, it makes everybody uneasy and they don't like you. And I don't blame him, he says. And unless we do something to remedy this, we will never, ever get rid of this. So basically, he's saying anti-Semitism is incurable. And if this diagnosis is correct, then what are you supposed to do? The only thing you can do is get out and get your own country. Now, that is a very, very interesting analysis, because all Jewish movements in the last 200 years have been predicated upon the hope and the belief that anti-Semitism is curable, that it can be made to go away if you apply the right medicine, if they liberalize, if they become socialist, if they become reform the religion, if they become conservative, if they become nationalist, Russified, and 100 other isms, socialism, Yiddishism, you name it. All these were done in the real, genuine belief that if we would only do this, they would put an end to anti-Semitism. Why did all of our relatives, and I know everybody had relatives who were communists, why did they all go communist? They honestly believed, that somewhere down in their cup, that if to be a communist world, to be a paradise, there'd be no more anti-Semitism. Now, they were stupid, but they really, really believed that. And therefore, they were willing to make great sacrifices on this account. Okay? Now, what if somebody tells you like this? Get over it, bud. It'll never go away. Wait a minute. We're always going to be few. There are going to be many. They'll never go away. Sooner or later we get killed. What am I supposed to do over here? I don't want to hear that. Hear what I just said? I don't want to hear it. You tell me something I don't want to hear. Wait a second. If a doctor tells somebody got diabetes, you better start, I don't want to hear it. You understand? You got heart trouble. I don't want to hear it. You tell me something I don't want to hear. So it's a denial. You understand? It doesn't affect the reality of it. And so this is basically his reaction. The reaction among the Jews was interesting because since he wasn't from, that was a gigantic plus. If religious people, rabbis, say, oh, Eretz Yisrael, all the rest of it, it's all part of the mythology and baloney of the Orthodox Judaism. But if somebody is completely secular and remove from all that is saying it, das ist etwas anders. You see? College students and other intellectuals read his pamphlet. Totally assimilated Jews all over Europe read his pamphlet, which was written in German, not in Russian. In German. His ideas start to get debated in the mainstream of Russian Jewry, in the newspapers. Look, the guy's not advocating military action, so he's not weird. He's calling for a worldwide movement of Jews to organize themselves around the idea of getting Israel. That's something that never happened in 2,000 years. Just like I told you before, the idea of moving out of your country to a better place was just totally out of the box until it wasn't. The idea of all the Jews getting together for some purpose, for some common constructive purpose, was never contemplated. Wait a minute, why not? The Jews have been able to do this since the French Revolution. Let me put it this way. In the time of Queen Victoria or something like that, what's to stop the French Jews, the British Jews, getting together, openly, publicly, peaceful, and say, what are ways we can do to help the Jewish people? Never happened. Why can't the American Jews and the European Jews? Never happened. Why not? Because you don't do it. Why don't you do it? Because our parents didn't do it. It's not, you don't do it. Why not? It's not a bad idea. Don't do it. You see what I'm saying? And this started to break that. And it's already in his pamphlet, he said like this: let's get groups, delegates from all the Jews everywhere together, not to make a military, and not to make a revolution, and not to anything like this. Let's consider ways to help the Jewish situation, and especially if we can figure out ways to put the beginnings of a Jewish presence in Eretz Yisrael. I'm not saying we have to be a state. I don't want to mess with anybody. I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want trouble with the Arabs. I don't want trouble with the Turks. Not trying to make any trouble. But what's wrong if you make a moshav here or something, or not bothering anybody else? Pay your taxes and live over there. And isn't this something the Jewish people, as a people, should do, or at least discuss within the context of a Jewish people? What do you German Jews have to say? What do the Russian Jews have to say? What do the American Jews have to say? What do the Sephardim have to say? What do the Italians maybe have something to contribute? What do the Polish Jews, the Romanian Jews, the Bulgarian Jews? What's wrong with that idea? You see? And because he put it out there, so I would say that this is really huge. Because it's the first call for a transnational Jewish organization. Here you are in 1881. The final culmination is the establishment of Israel. So this is something I'm 70 years later. Now again, it wasn't people's mentality. But as I said before, why not? Now, I told you, Western Jews were very uncomfortable. The German Jews, the English Jews, the French Jews. Why do you say anti-Semitism is incurable? It's not incurable, which of course means that it is. In other words, if they really thought it's baloney, they wouldn't have reacted. If somebody says today, tomorrow the Martians are landing in America, you don't react. If somebody, on the other hand, says, something realistic, then you react. So, by the way, I just want to be clear. Pinsker was not from, he would be glad with the Uganda. It didn't have to be Israel. Just be clear about that, right? His analysis, the Jews have to have their own country. It could be New Zealand, you know what I mean? It could be somewhere else. But these are all secular Jews with secular ideas. Where does God and religion fit into this? As soon as you would say to Pinsker, God and religion, it rolled the eyes. Here we go with those guys. Right? Rolled the eyes. But the masses in 1881 are still religious, masses in Russia. A few intellectuals talking themselves in an effective, reading a pamphlet. If you're talking about a genuine national movement, to do something to end anti-Semitism, you need the masses. How are the masses to be reached? The Frummies don't trust you, and I don't blame them. They won't have the same philosophical basis for a national movement, because they're coming from a religious perspective. They won't have a realistic movement for the first time in 1900 years. How do you put all those things together to make something out of it? The Frum, the not from, this group, that group, the assimilation is all within Russian Jewry in reaction to the pogroms. That you'll have to stay tuned for next time. Good night. We'll dive in a minute as always.